Hello and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we are following Jonathan Riddell, choreographer and artistic director of Riddell Dance Theater, as he creates his latest works for RDT's Second Story Dance project and delves into new creative territory. Today we'll be focusing on Jonathan's demo album, the latest developments, and giving you a little preview into the transition back to Second Story's rehearsals starting next week, which will officially mark the end of our summer hiatus. But first, the demo album. So ding, 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 here's the latest. Jonathan has finalized the construction of all 6 songs, which certainly in my book counts as a major milestone.
Yes.
So that is very exciting, very exciting. And in so doing, Jonathan's been speaking to me about thinking about the album as a whole, not simply the sum of its disparate individual parts. And with that in mind, really going for a cohesive sound for the album. And toward that end, he took 3 different steps, at least so far. The first is that Jonathan figured out how to play with the volume of the different tracks so that each individual song's overall volume would be fairly similar to every other one on the album. So there'd be a relative uniformity of volume, and then thank you, Jonathan, because now your listeners will not have to keep adjusting their volume dials when they listen. Second, the songs on John's album tend to fall into 2 broad categories. One would be a more rock and roll industrial type of feel, and the other would be a more acoustic type of sound. And I think in an attempt, from what I understand, John, to again not feel as if this album is really in 2 different pieces, Jonathan then went to his more acoustic sounding pieces and played with the instrumentation to increase the, shall we call, industrial element, so that again you have a more unified album, at least from a sound standpoint. And third, get this, Jonathan just wrote another song, just like that. Yes, unbelievable. But his thinking was, might the addition of another song in a particular type of style be the piece that balances the whole, so to speak? So stay tuned as we play around with that and Jonathan determines whether or not, in fact, that will be a successful change, or perhaps the start of album 2. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah.
Which would
either way, it's a win.
It's a win-win, without a question. So, in our last videocast, Jonathan took us through the painstaking process of seemingly endless experimentation with a variety of different ideas, to the point where he essentially deconstructed an entire song, went back to the drawing board, and what emerged was a new song that barely resembled the original version. But today, Jonathan was going to describe for us a process whereby he again went back to the drawing board, but with a very different result. Mm-hmm. He ultimately concluded that he wanted to return to the original version of this particular song, albeit with a couple of tweaks. Mm-hmm. So, John, would you take us through, just as you did last week, but here almost a reverse type of situation, the process by which you went through all of this experimentation with song number 5, some of which you did share in our last video cast, but you've now come to a different type of conclusion.
Right.
How did that work?
So that song, which is called One Mistake, it also has a subtitle, The Ray, the Clouds, and the Shimmer, which we talked about a few podcasts ago when I was very, very first creating it. I was really toiling with
right word.
Yeah.
Tough.
With this song. And a lot of it, now that I have perspective on it, was technical, how to record it, because the song that I had written, I think, was a good song by itself. The lyrics, the general music, the structure was all sound and good and lovely. However, I don't have the technical ability to record such a song the way I would like it. Right. It's a very bare song. It involves essentially a few beats, an acoustic guitar part that is looped, and my voice. So it's very sparse, as I just said, and therefore requires all of the nuance and the richness of my voice, if I may say. It needs to be very well recorded to capture that. It needs to be very well performed on my part, which I'm not always singing these songs under fabulous circumstances. So sometimes we just get what we get, and it requires me to not only perform, but again to capture in the recording a very quiet beginning, almost as if I'm in a room or an attic just singing to myself, and slowly over the course of the song becoming louder, bolder, and by the end singing full volume, with a rock grit to it, and I just technically can't do that with the little microphone I have in my computer. I'm sure other people can. Great, let's talk. But I was trying, I think, for months now to make this sound right. And of course, with not having the best perspective, or the most experienced perspective on this, a lot of what I consider too, as well, is it the song? Is it the lyrics? Is it the song structure? Is it just not an interesting enough song? Why isn't it sounding the way I want it to? And it really took this especially this most recent burst of experimentation, where I, as Sherry described, I started to write an additional chorus part to it, where a whole new melody would kick in with harmonies, and basically going from the verse chorus structure to verse chorus chorus, a second chorus back to verse chorus chorus. I then also where I had multiple verses in a row, I was taking those out because I felt like the song was long and dragging, again because I wasn't happy with the sound I was getting. I was just doing anything to make it move more and sound more interesting. And so I really deconstructed it. I created what I would call my radio edit, where I took like an 8-minute song and I squashed it down to closer to 5 minutes, which is still a long song for a radio, but it had these additional choruses in and less verses. And I was pretty darn happy with what I came up with. Again, it started to sound like a very different song. I had also started to tweak some of the instruments, as you talked about, to give them a much more of a grit and an edge, take it away from the just pure raw acoustic feel, and give it some more production value. And yeah, I was getting pretty happy with this version, but then I played it for my wife. I maybe played it for someone else, and I just slept on it another night or two. And especially talking to my wife, she was like, "Well, this is great, but it's not." Here I am thinking I created this hugely different version. She's like, "It's kind of not that different, and your first version was so strong." And again, she sort of professed how much she liked that first version, and I was like, oh, to hear someone be like, "I really loved that. Why are you changing it?" I was like, oh, okay. But, and again, she said, but the impact of the song isn't really any better. It's just different. And if you were really trying to improve upon this, you haven't. You've just made a sort of parallel different version. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. And hearing her say that, I agreed with her. I was like, oh, I think she's right. And so again, after stepping back, I listened to one of the original versions I had, and kind of went, oh, maybe she's right. But what I had gleaned from the whole process was this one little sort of looped sound effect, kind of a it's like a little gurgling rhythm. It's a little this is a little electronic looping rhythm that I had tried inserting into the song and pretty much running throughout the whole song. I fell in love with that, and I also loved a little bit some of the industrial edge I gave to some of the rhythms and stuff. But what I wound up doing is just keeping those sort of basically those two tweaks, and stripping everything back to its original version, and with just those little subtle tweaks. Oh, and one other major tweak that I forgot to mention, that big loud volume performance I was talking about, that should, quote unquote, come at the end of the song. I realized that I didn't have to perform it that way. In the highly remixed version, I had gone back to a quiet performance at the end. So while the music climaxes, my vocals go back to that sort of quiet, more lullaby type sound. And I really liked that. And whether it's the greatest choice in the world, if I had the world as my oyster, I don't know, but it works, and it technically sounds good, because I can record a nice quiet voice with this microphone, with this computer, with how my voice is. So my voice, if I do that, it sounds good throughout the whole song, and it doesn't get blaring into the microphone and distorted and odd sounding. So those, what are I would still describe as subtle changes, remained, but after all of that experimentation, I went back to my original version, and now I'm very happy with it.
Well, I think if we think about your description of the process from last videocast and from today, to me, they're wonderfully representative of this process in general. Sometimes you may loop back to your original concept, perhaps with a couple of tweaks, and at other times zooming off into a whole new direction. And there's simply no way to know that in advance.
No.
Hence process.
But the journey was worth it in both cases. It was worth experimenting. It was worth going for some bold ideas that popped in my head. I was like, well, I gotta try it. I gotta know what that is.
That's right.
I can't live my life wondering whether it would have worked or not. I need to know. So,
well, still bitten by the experimenting bug, John continued experimenting, but this time by playing with the order of the songs on the album.
Right.
But just as he just described to us with song number 5, the titles continually go out of my brain. I apologize publicly for that. I just know them by numbers. As with song number 5, you did
one mistake.
One mistake. Yeah, I'll get it one day. Yes. As with one mistake, Jonathan ultimately, after all of this experimentation, concluded that the original order of the songs that he had was the one that felt best to him. But what I found particularly interesting in speaking with Jonathan about this was that this process of experimentation wound up influencing John's thinking on 2 other elements of the album that are not directly related. First, John had been contemplating changing the lyrics somewhat in a couple of the different songs. And suddenly, as I understand it, John, through this experimental process, you gained this clarity, and suddenly you thought, yes, I'm definitely going to make these changes. This is right. So you were quite secure in that idea. Yeah. And the second was what we described a little bit earlier in this videocast, which was gaining this clarity about the importance of a unified approach to the album, which translates into a cohesive sound, and what you needed to do to make that happen. And as Jonathan was describing all of this to me, I was thinking in general about different kinds of systems in life, whereby when we make one change in one element, inevitably the entire system starts to shift and other elements change as well. And I think
that's so true.
This was a great example of that, and I can only imagine that in the overall process of composing and shaping this album, that can be perhaps at once exhilarating and exhausting, and extremely the word's not even coming to me, but it's got to be really tough, because to change one thing and then all of these other things need to be changed. I can see this sort of like an animal in a habitat going around the wheel, and that process never ending, in a manner of speaking. So it could be quite challenging.
I heard an author describe it once as this was an author then making using the metaphor of moving furniture around, and he said, you move one piece of furniture,
right,
and it affects the balance of the whole room and where all the other furniture is placed. So you move one thing, and then suddenly you have to move 2 or 3 other things at least, right? But it wasn't just that. He's like, then you have to go back to the carpet and smooth out the little indentations of each footprint of the furniture and make sure like that goes away. And then you go, oh, but wait, no, that would look better over there. So then you move that, you have to then reconfigure, and then you have to smooth out the carpet. And I was like, yes, you know my pain.
Yes.
Yeah, with this song order, it's just interesting to note that I mean I had a vision for the song order as I was writing the songs, and once I kind of had the rough ideas sketched out for the songs, I think we talked about this in an earlier video cast. Like originally I thought it was going to be 5 songs, and then as they kind of came to be, I was like, no, I need a 6th to make this order work. And when the songs are in that order, there's a certain sort of emotional arc that is carried from song 1 all the way through to song 6. And that was part of the agony of when some of the songs were in tricky stages of development, because it would be like, okay, well, I could also just can this song, I could just trash it and get rid of it, but it's like, but then the arc of the album will shift, and, so it was like, oh, there's a whole bigger picture to consider.
Yes.
And so all of that agony, but ultimately, then I had a pretty polished for a demo, but polished versions of the 6 songs. And I knew there was going to be this sort of divide between basically kind of 3 industrial sounding songs and 3 more acoustic sounding songs. An acoustic guitar is sort of prevalent in the other 3. But I kind of was like, I think that's okay, because again, it's a journey, and it's a journey from a rebellious, aggressive, perhaps angry vibe and sound through a sort of a catharsis. I love catharses. So many of my works involve some big catharsis, and at the end the person has grown, and so that's kind of what I was creating, and so that then by the end of the album you have this more stripped back, more personal approach, a more personal sound. Makes sense, right? But when I finally listened to it and I was like, okay, these are the 90% done versions, how does it really sound? And again, when I played it for my wife, she said it best. She's like, it just kind of sounds like by the end you're a different artist. And I feel like yes, by the end I am a different artist, but I shouldn't be like a totally different person. Like I shouldn't be like, suddenly I'm a woman or, something like that. It's like, just I should have grown, but not completely changed who I am. And it kind of felt that way a little bit. So I was like, yeah, I know. So, but then, it was great because she delved right in it there with me. She's like, well, let's play with the order and see, what we can come up with. And we came up with a few alternate orders to the songs, which again, a little bit felt sacrilegious to me because, again, for months at least, I'd been conceiving of this order. But, again, I kind of had to go down that road of experimenting. And we did come up with 1 or 2 orders where sound-wise we could bounce back and forth between the 2 styles. So it just became a little more natural. Like, okay, this artist clearly has 2 sides and he bounces back and forth between them pretty easily. And so then you're just going on this sort of zigzagging journey, but it didn't really feel like a journey to me, which was a little sad. It felt like now just a collection of songs that just kind of sound fine in this order, which is perfectly fine. There's plenty of great albums that are just collections of great songs, but I knew it could be more. And really this sort of, I really was missing that emotional journey, because now you had songs that were much more introspective, interspersed with songs that were aggressive and extroverted. And when you just kind of go back and forth between them, you don't get a feeling of development. Um, so while I was like, okay, well that could work. Again, I had to step away and go, but does it feel right? No. Um, so somehow I want to make my original order work, and upon listening to it, I said, it, the original order is what feels best. However, I will try and tweak the sound on some of the more acoustic songs to make them sound more like the artist of the original, of the industrial songs. And that came in the form of, adding some fuzz and distortion to some of the guitars,
Right.
adding some fuzz and distortion to my own voice, um, uh, changing up some of the beats, making them, again, either more distorted or more electronic sounding. But again, it had to be very subtle because I couldn't also ruin the original vibe of what was making these songs successful to begin with. Again, each song I had gotten to be, in my mind, great in its own right, but it's how do they fit together in this collection. So I couldn't, some of my experimentation, again, sounded great, but it like kind of really wrenched the songs away from their original intent, and that didn't sit well with me.
Well, what a difficult and
It's
tall
really
order, which I'm imagining you've encountered. You referred just briefly before, but in your choreography experience, when you have a number or a suite of pieces, there's always, I guess, this inherent, shall we call it, tension between each piece as its own work of art, so to speak, but the pieces belong together in a puzzle, so the entire puzzle has to make sense, and there always is in John's work, I have seen too, there is a distinctive narrative arc. And John, you rarely go into anything you do without that broad strokes vision. And one way or another, I've seen that you take special care to ensure that you are true to that vision, even if the path is a bit zigzaggy, so to speak. You always come back to that, and I think that is possibly one of the sources of a lot of the agita and angst here, how to make these seemingly sometimes contradictory elements work, because you do need all of them to work.
Right.
Hence, he's still working.
Yes, still working.
But it's an amazing process that I suspect any artist in any genre has to go through, one way or another.
I think so. Maybe they would describe it differently, but I think all the same issues pop up. And the new song came out of that desire too. So, how do I speak about that? One possible solution I had in messing around with this song order and trying to make my original intention work is, well, maybe I just need one more song that will sort of, as you said, strike the right balance among all of these songs together. So a sort of loose vision I had is, I need one more industrial sounding song because I wanted that to be the predominant sound of the album. And I kind of had an idea that, okay, maybe if I had a song inserted among the three more acoustic sounding songs, it would break up that sound a little bit. It would bring you back to the industrial sound before we then conclude on the acoustic side of things. However, it was a very daunting order to give myself such a pigeonhole to create a song in. It was like, and sometimes that can be great, but I'm already operating under constraints, given the way these songs are being formed through like pretty much only through loops, and so I really have to work with what I have. And so what I did is I said, okay, well, that's plan A, but plan B could be that the song winds up at the end of the album. So we go industrial to acoustic, back to industrial. That's a great arc. It's actually one that my wife was like, I really would love to have that sort of arc. And I said, oh, well, great. So maybe just like a big old like dancey finale could happen at the end. That would be fun. Or I could take one of the a great dancey finale song that I already have, which is Amethyst, which is track number 2. I could write this new song and I could switch them, you know, and put that at the end. That was not my favorite because the content of Amethyst is, it doesn't evolve, but maybe it's okay after going on this catharsis that the character kind of goes back to, you know, something dancey and gritty and angry. I don't know, that's fine. So anyway, I gave myself at least some options, like, so that whatever this song comes out as, maybe it'll be useful in one of these 3 ways and this will work. So I said, and John, just also don't beat yourself up to like do something so new and wild that like it you know, tears you apart. Like, go with your strengths, go back to what made, you know, this whole album work for you in the first place, and you know, do what you know how to do well. So I started laying down the beats. I found some great bass lines and just started playing around with some lyrics, and this song evolved quite quickly. And I wasn't sure that it was gonna be the right song, but I also didn't stop myself there. When those doubts came in, I was like, doesn't matter, just keep writing it, because you never know.
Exactly.
You know enough that you never know. And as you said, maybe it'll just be a great track to open the next album or something. So I went on this journey to create this song, and all the while, so I'm doing that to kind of engage one part of my brain, while the other part of my brain is doing all of that other adjustments to the songs that we've described to you already. So this is kind of going on simultaneously over this past week.
No wonder he is exhausted.
No wonder I'm do you see the bags? And last night, I think I found myself with the kids in bed, and Rhonda was busy with her studies, and I was like, great, I'm just gonna like plug in that microphone and lay down just a basic vocal track of the lyrics I have, and let's just hear how it sounds. Like, again, no pressure, none. Because at this point, I've pretty much settled, like, if I do these 6, and with the tweaks I've made, I'm very happy. I'm happy. I think the album can now work with these 6, with these little tweaks, kind of like we described, just some subtle things, but that bring the sound together. But let me just see how this song is shaping up. And so I laid down those vocals, and I listened to it, and I was like, I love this! It's a great little, it's a hot little number. It's very dancey, it's very gritty, it's very goth and I love it. And then I quickly like converted it to an MP3 and threw it into the playlist where I originally wanted it. I was like, okay, let's see how it sounds, and it sounds great. It fits into the flow of the album really well. So, you know, mission accomplished. Again, I kind of just, that's, again, this is one of those things where it's like all those variables I described to you, and it all just kind of works out exactly the way I wanted it to. And, you know, it's one where I just say I prayed it into existence. I don't know how I did it. Don't know how I did it. I do know how I did it. I just described to you how I did it. But like the fact that it works, it was just like the ABP piece. It's like fitting that ballet that into amongst the other ballets and under all the context of how it needed to be made, and just will, and then it worked. I do not know, I will add, if I will actually add it to the album yet or not, or save it for album number 2. I'm going to sleep on that. I'm going to give it a minute.
And we know what happens when John sleeps on things.
It'll be a whole new song by the end of the week.
Which means it's a very effective way Jonathan has to ensure that you all come back each week and see where we're at and what's going on. And speaking of that, John, it has truly been the summer of creative cross-training for Jonathan, composing music, writing songs, choreographing a brand new duet for ABB, and setting the Verdenfire Quartet on the dancers as well. So it has been a cornucopia of creativity for this 2.5 month period. And next week we return to second story rehearsals, and we are preparing for 2 big shows in the fall. One is Steffi Nossen's Choreographers Showcase at the Emlyn Theater, which will take place in November. And the other is the Mamaroneck Arts Council's Art Life event, which will take place in December. So we've got a lot of work to do, and that did lead me to think of 2 how do you feel questions for Jonathan. One, looking back.
I said exhausted, right? I said that already? Okay.
And you may say it again. Okay. One, looking back over this hiatus period, and the other projecting forward. So, John, how do you feel about your summer of creative cross-training, and how are you feeling about this transition back to rehearsing with Second Story and preparing for 2 shows in the fall?
Gosh, I am ecstatic through the exhaustion about the creative cross-training. I love that I have accomplished so much with my songwriting, and it's a, you know, as we've said, it's something it's a passion that bubbled up for me in my youth, but then I put aside for many years, and now that it's back in like full force, like it's kind of overtaken my life a little bit, but in a great way, because I'm so excited about it and curious about it, and it's just constantly on my mind. I love that. And it's up until, I would actually say up until this week, it was sort of then daunting to think about going back to Second Story, just because it was like, oh, but you know, I'm on such a roll with this, and then, you know, once I do that, it's going to take time away from this. But I love that too. Like I mean, oh my God, I love my dances and my dancers and my colleagues, and we always have such a great time. So, but I think what I said to myself was, well, it will come. you will naturally transition, and it doesn't mean one is going away.
Exactly.
It just means timing is going to shift a little bit. And but this was a couple weeks ago. I was like, but I don't have to worry about that now. I will worry about that when it happens. And I won't need to worry because it will just happen naturally.
Right.
And not to make predictions, but it's maybe no coincidence that the album work is kind of wrapping up, just in the nick of time for me to next week start
Right.
rehearsals more, where I'll have less time for the album. And I'm now that the school year's starting, I'm starting to teach again. I'm starting to move more and get more into dance in other ways. So now I'm starting to feel excitement towards the rehearsals. That's starting to brew. So I'm kind of letting the tide happen, which is great because I don't have to feel like I'm controlling anything. I'm just letting my bliss shift colors, kind of.
And I think something just occurred to me, John, as you described that, and again, you and I famously speak about foreground and background shifts in terms of one's artistic interests and endeavors. But I'm also thinking about the conditions under which you have created, and thinking, for example, about ABB, how you needed to create in a very, very tight time frame. And you have shared with us what that meant and what the process looked like as a result. But there were elements of it that you really liked working that way.
Yeah.
Conversely, but similarly, I know you haven't heard that before, when we, in one of our earlier video casts during the year, Jonathan spoke about the pace of working that is associated with second story, and given the second story context in which you're creating in a very, very slow, almost sort of dragged out, lengthy process, which I think you worried about in the beginning that would be very frustrating. But in fact, you spoke quite eloquently to us about what working that way afforded you. Certain opportunities to delve deeply into detail in a way that might not have been possible otherwise. So I think that there are interesting advantages to all different kinds of conditions, to all different configurations of the ball, some balls in the foreground, some balls in the background, and shifting in that wherever they happen to be, I guess, in conclusion, is okay, because they all offer something interesting.
Yeah. As you say that, what comes to mind is expectations. I think certainly in my youth, I would set an expectation for what the work needed to be, and then desperately try to achieve that regardless of the context, thinking it was my duty as an artist to create this no matter what.
Right.
And what I have learned, especially since children, is that when taking on a project, to really, to the best of your ability, consider the context, consider the amount of time you're going to have, the amount of people you're collaborating with and whatnot, and adjust your vision accordingly. Select, if you have a variety of pieces in mind, let's say, or ideas in mind, select the one that will best fit that context. And know, or at least what I've learned is, I now know that whatever I do, it will be great if I bring to it my integrity every moment that I have to work on it. If that makes sense. So I could, if I have only 30 minutes to create something, if I give it my best 30 minutes, I can create a small little something, but it'll be just a juicy nugget of delish. Great. Or if I have hours and hours, weeks and weeks to make something, months and months, great. And all the time in the world, great. Then I can make a huge opus, beautiful. But I should not have those things switch. I should not say, well, I only have a day to make this, but it's gotta be huge. Like, that's just a headache, and that's just failure waiting to happen. What is it? Set yourself up for success, I guess, is what people say. But I guess I had always thought that if it wasn't sort of big and bold and monumental, then it wasn't worth doing. But that's absolutely not true.
I think that may be, Jonathan, one of the biggest preconceived ideas that you have been wrestling with for a very long time, and I do see a shift in your thinking about that. And maybe in conclusion, by identifying the preconceived notions, by grabbing those expectations and really understanding that you have them, and what you want to do about it, and maybe clearing it away, I think it gives you the room then to feed yourself in any number of ways. And I think you found that you can be fed under many, many different kinds of circumstances by many, many different facets of the creative world. And I think that's amazing to have gotten to that place, because I think that really takes a lot of pressure off of you to have to play it a certain way. And so I think in general, this notion of identifying the preconceived ideas that drive us and finding out whether or not they're truly in sync with who we are, what we need, what we want. And I think that's part of life's journey and challenge. And how wonderful that you've been able to share that with us, Jonathan, in real time. All summer long. So while we've called this a hiatus, I must say it's been anything but.
Yes, anything
but it's been an amazing journey, and I hope, and John, I know, joins me in this hope, that you will continue to join us as we travel this path together and see where it leads. So thank you so much for being with us this evening, and we look forward to moving into the fall with you. Good night.